Please verify removal of infection something.
So you just have to show it a severed tail?
To the cool person who answers quickly. 50,001. Haha.
I thought it was to prove you'd hunted an infected entity and helped stop the spread. That's how you get access to the pod. Ha.
As soon as that answer came back, Agent Choi nodded and immediately handed over cash.
All right then. Grape seeds. Want to come over here? And let's bring that friend you were just talking to as well.
Kim Soleum, standing among the children, took one child by the hand and walked toward the escape pod. Fortunately, it seemed the Daydream employees hadn't realized he was an agent. Ryu Jaekwon, on alert, reached into Baek Sehyun's bag and yanked out several conch shells as if robbing him, handing them to Agent Choi. Baek Sehyun's quiet stream of curses, swallowed in frustration, didn't make it through. Agent Choi smiled and lifted one of the conch shells, approaching Grapes.
If you just close your eyes for a second, it'll be over quick.
Whoa! It's a real white spaceship!
The child standing beside Grapes suddenly ran toward the escape pod. Grapes followed the child, running all the way to the front of the escape pod.
Forcibly boarding an infected child onto the escape pod will trigger rapid shedding, causing ulcers to erupt across the entire body and resulting in total loss of life signs. Do not attempt under any circumstances.
To make matters worse, the Daydream Inc. employees immediately shifted into an aggressive stance. Agent Bronze stepped in to block them. At that moment, Grapes turned at the sound of his name. Naturally, his tail brushed against the escape pod's door device. The message displayed the same message again.
Please verify removal of infection something.
Wow, you were right. It flashed just now.
In that brief moment, Agent Choi ran over and yanked both of them back. Watching the scene through the suncatcher, Agent Bronze let out a short sigh and dropped his threatening posture toward Daydream Inc. A tense silence lingered in the air.
Ha! Still, at least the escape pod isn't attacking. That's a relief.
Agent Choi didn't even have time to wipe the cold sweat from his brow before he raised the conch shell. Agent Bronze felt something strange from the scene he had just witnessed. The device had reacted again the moment a living tail made contact, and his superior's words. At least the escape pod isn't attacking. That's a relief.
If we just treat the kids, hand them the severed tails, and board them, this isn't what we think.
Agent Bronze reread the text on the device.
Please verify removal of infection something.
It read as if one were meant to remove an infection, like killing the infected merfolk, and verify it.
This is already a ruined city. Judging by how hastily this escape pod space was constructed, it must have been built in a rush during the final collapse as a last-ditch escape attempt. That would mean most of the people expected to use this escape pod were already infected.
Agent Bronze turned again toward the last remaining escape pod.
And if it really was the last remaining means of escape, it wouldn't be strange for it to have been designed under the assumption that everyone was infected.
In that case, to minimize the risk of contagion spreading to other locations.
Both agents turned their gaze to the tails, those grotesque biological masses, leaking infectious mucus.
It means the directive is to sever the infectious appendage, the tail, and then board the escape pod.
Then the device's message took on a completely different meaning.
Please verify removal of infectious protrusion.
It wasn't telling them to hunt and kill another infected being. It was telling them to remove their own infection source, the tail. Only coherent beings who had severed their tail and verified it could safely board.
Wait, then that means...
For the first time today, a faint smile of exhilaration appeared on Agent Bronze's face.
We don't need to fully cure the infection. If the children simply cut off their tails and verify it, they should be able to board the escape pod without the conch shell. And if we only use the conches on the kids who are at risk of dying from blood loss when cutting their tails...
As long as they distribute them correctly.
We can all get out, together.
Not a single child left behind. They could rescue everyone from this supernatural disaster. I clenched my fist discreetly. I was still among the children, so I wouldn't be noticed, but I had to stifle the sighs of relief and joy that kept trying to escape my lips. By naturally merging Daydream Inc.'s intel with the disaster management bureaus, they had reached a conclusion similar to the one I'd reasoned out. How much effort had it taken to steer everyone to this conclusion without raising suspicion? It's been a truly brutal day. Even getting infected was a wise choice. It would be a lie to say it wasn't horrifying and revolting. but the benefits gained by becoming infected were too valuable to give up. From concealing my identity completely from Daydream Inc. employees by hiding behind the tumor covering half my face, to ultimately giving them a direct hint toward the conclusion. You can enter the escape pod if you sever the tail. It had been the one and only correct answer. It was the only way to break through every obstacle naturally without arousing suspicion. I might be able to take myself off the suspect list, too. Agent Choi knew I could transform into a stray animal. After all, he was the one who recommended the item. Of course, due to the effects of the fake Necronomicon, the two couldn't be directly linked, but you never know. After escaping, suspicion might still arise. Better to bury it with something stronger. That's why I chose to attempt infection up to the limit of what my rationality could endure. Gradually increasing the infected mucus, deliberately ingesting it little by little. This was the limit. This current state, with half my face engulfed in tumorous boils. Able to understand the hive's will and the strange telepathy shared with the children, yet without losing my own sense of self. Strangely enough, the dokebi trick that turned me into a child actually helped. Maybe because it forcibly fixed me in the form of my child self. In any case, I'd kept the option of taking a nostalgia candy if things went south. But now it looked like I wouldn't need it. I believed in you, agents. The Supernatural Disaster Management Bureau really is different from that damn psychopath potion company. It was actually kind of touching. This is the classic Disaster Management Bureau-style resolution I haven't seen since before the Dark Exploration records took off. Trying to save as many as possible, and actually succeeding in the end. Maybe it was because I was in a child's body, but my chest swelled with emotion. Sniff. Of course, this being a ghost story, about half the time these kinds of attempts ended in total annihilation, but this time, things were going smoothly. Now all we had to do was time our escape together. That's when it happened. A strange sensation began crawling up from my tail. Beside me, a child in a blue dress muttered softly. No, it wasn't just that one child. All 27 children standing near me lifted their heads to look into the air. Every single young mer child who still had their tails attached.
The mermaid princess is angry.
All the hosts sensed something from somewhere no one could pinpoint. A threat to survival. She was searching for where it had been triggered, and now she had found it. The mermaid princess. A chill swept down my spine. My mouth moved on its own, quickly.
The mermaid princess is on her way.
And hundreds of tumor masses began to surge downward. When you think about it, it's strange. The disaster that occurred when a Disaster Management Bureau agent once tried to forcibly load an infected child onto the escape pod. Acute molting occurs. Ulcers erupt across the entire body, and all vital signs are lost. Contamination spreads rapidly, resulting in death. If this were the escape pod attempting to eliminate internal threats, the reaction was far too deliberate. It was more like the action of the infection source itself. It makes more sense to interpret it as the doing of the biohazard merfolk. A punishment dealt to a host that dares to break away from the hive. But this information was known only to the Disaster Management Bureau agents, while conversely more detailed intel about the escape pod was only available to the employees of Daydream Inc. Fragmented information. And that's exactly why no one could reasonably predicted what was happening now. A child raised a hand.
It's the mermaid princess!
With a thunderous crash, a mass pierced through the ceiling and smashed into the terminal. A sound like children laughing, no, like ulcerated tissue, colliding, filled the entire station. Countless tumor-like tendrils, spewing horrid mucus, descended and braced themselves like feet. Like spiderwebs hanging down, flesh masses that excreted mucus extended limbs like tentacles and clung to every wall of the shattered terminal. From the massive infected hive came its most grotesque core was a monstrous shape that now coiled before the ocean palace. It slammed its meaty mass down, blanketing the terminal. Scream, Baek Deok-soo stood frozen, screaming, then shoved back the employee who tried to push him forward and quickly retreated. A company employee was snatched by the fleshy mass, the sound of a skull cracking, blood and mucus being sucked out. Clutching the bag containing the conch shells, he bolted toward the escape pod. Someone grabbed the back of his neck. No, he'd already confirmed who it was through that halo, but had kept quiet until now. The infected Kim Soleum slammed the back of Baek Deok-soo's head to the floor. In that moment, a mass of flesh flew past overhead. Baek Deok-soo swallowed hard.
Move recklessly and die.
The infected mass had very clearly wrapped itself around the escape pod at the center. Then, Kim Soleum, with a strange expression, began looking up at the grotesque mass of infection. The surroundings turned disturbingly quiet. Baek Deok-soo frantically looked around. All the mer children were looking up at the sky with the same expression, raising their hands. The two agents also turned their eyes to the massive figure that had burst through the ceiling into the terminal. A dazzlingly beautiful mermaid form appeared, as if sunlight had poured in from the terminal ceiling, filling the empty white space. Like a living statue of the mermaid princess, the enormous mermaid glowed with a divine aura. Overwhelming awe, admiration, and enchantment filled their minds. Emotions that one should rightly feel in the presence of a being so great.
The empty white void is overlaid by the beautiful Twinkle Twinkle Ocean Palace. A small golden fang-shaped plaza glimmers like a chapel. Fill it with praise, worship, and affection, and look up to your master child. But there is no such thing as an escape pod here. This is a place of prayer. A place to pray to the mermaid princess and...
Agent Choi lifted his suncatcher and barely managed to block his view. Beside him, his hubei mimicked the action and spat blood, having bitten his tongue to jolt himself back. But again, the gaze from above. A flash burst from Agent Choi's hand. A flicker of light burning within the lantern. Red and blue fire pushed back the golden glow of the mermaid's halo. The Dokabe house blazed, creating a space of illusion. Where the flames reached, tile-roofed houses wavered, and the shadows of dancing, singing Dokabes flickered. A fleeting moment where anomaly repelled anomaly.
We won't last long during that time.
They had to sever as many tails as possible and get the children into the escape pod. The mermaid, no, the fleshy mass, raged and tried to reach the escape pod again, but the space around it distorted, forcing it to circle near the ceiling. Now's the chance. The adults in suits scrambled toward the escape pod, those wearing animal masks. The employees of Daydream Inc. Agent Choi's eyes darkened. Baek Deok-soo was grinding his teeth, watching the same scene. Now was the time to run, but the problem was that Kim Soleum still had his hand gripped tightly around Baek Deok-soo's head, holding him down. Cunning flashed in Baek Deok-soo's eyes. Was there a way to push him off? Since the fucker looked like a child, maybe he's physically weaker than him? No, wait, he's contaminated. He might be even stronger. Still, one thing was clear. Most contaminated individuals often lacked signs of human intelligence. Madness and bizarre rules governed their minds.
Excuse me. Shouldn't you be more worried about the big one above me? She can't come in right now. Shouldn't you be cheering her on?
The bastard was baiting him. Did turning into a merchild make him unable to understand words? Then Baek Deok-soo could just write on the ground. But just as he tried to scrawl the same message on the dusty floor with his finger, the pressure pinning his head down vanished. Baek Deok-soo shot up, ready to bolt, only for Kim Soleum to press him back down again. Then Kim Soleum began writing on the floor. A dazed Baek Deok-soo blurted out without thinking. Kim Soleum turned his gaze toward the opposite side of the escape pod, the passage going out.
Are they all morons or what?
Jin Nassal twitched her temple as she looked at the Daydream employees clinging to the escape pod like moths. Even if they got inside, how exactly did they plan to get out? The path for the escape pod's launch was completely blocked by that filthy biological disaster mass. They were acting like clueless punks blinded by rewards instead of reading the room.
Ooh, is there like a spot on the escape pod where we can shoot a laser beam or something?
Ignoring the money-obsessed rookie's nonsense, Jin Nassal assessed the situation.
Why the hell am I the one stuck doing this? That flesh lump started going berserk the moment the mer children were brought near.
As a test, she grabbed one mer child by the scruff of the neck and prepared to toss it toward the biomass.
You're out of your mind.
The sharp glare of a furious government agent stopped her. Having completed a quick emergency ritual under Agent Choi's protection, he had shed his child form through the Dokabe trick and returned to his adult self. A necessary decision, as the situation was escalating fast. Clenching his teeth, he growled at the employee in the butterfly mask like he was spitting poison.
You saw him as a real child, didn't you?
If he can't use the conch, he's just an infected freak, isn't he? Even without it. If he just cuts off the tail, he can board the pod. So stop.
Even if you board, then what? You think you can pry that thing off the launch gate?
So, do you have bombs stashed in your pocket or what? No? Yeah, I figured.
And it wasn't even certain whether human firepower would work, whether it was a biological disaster or a ghost.
Let's just throw a few of them outside and scatter the focus, then make a run for it. Take whoever's left if you want. But assistant manager, the cat told us to take all of them.
If we leave any behind, we'll get cursed or lose our reward. There's even that saying, a cat always returns a favor.
Ugh.
We're about to die, and you're worried about a curse. Go cry about it when you're outside, yeah?
That cat hadn't shown itself again. Chances were it was a one-off irregular phenomenon.
So forget the cat or whatever.
Please cooperate with the civilian rescue.
The capture cable sprang out from Agent Bronze's hand. Jin Nassau scoffed and grabbed her own special equipment. He had to incapacitate her fast. Agent Bronze gritted his teeth, glancing toward Agent Choi's flames. The infected hive's call was beginning to pierce through the warped space and infiltrate the illusion of fire. The mesmerizing golden light began to take hold of the children once again.
Somehow, please, just hurry. No, even if they cut every child's tail, it was becoming impossible to see how they could all escape from this place. Did they have to make selections?
With grim eyes, Agent Bronze reached out his hand. A malevolent gaze slammed into the space. A description of a terrible, overwhelming being filled the room like a divine descent. Yes, it was descending. A voice soaked in rapturous madness burst from behind the pony mask. All the humans froze.
Bells, voices, laughter, deception. The call to a beautiful Germanic land to eternal rot decay and mindless servitude.
The children once enthralled by the biological disaster staggered, lowering their heads. Their collective psychic disarray shook the infected hive, and even the towering image of the mermaid princess began to tremble. The children began tearing off their own tails. With faces twisted in madness and terror, they screamed toward the sky. Then, sobbing, they ripped their own tails off. Blood and mucus sprayed in all directions. It was a hellish sight. The anomaly was devouring the anomaly. Ryu Jaekwon struggled to his feet and began stopping the bleeding of several children. But his mind had begun to comprehend the language of a different dimension.
Wouldn't you like to know the horrific truth of this world? Madness shall set you free. So this world is actually...
Ryu Jaekwon jerked his head up. The sound of that malevolent scripture had vanished without him realizing. All that remained were the children standing stiff from mental shock, bleeding from the spots where their tails had been, and the giant tumorous mass writhing violently. The creature, now severed from every single host, shrieked in rage, or perhaps in instinctive panic at the threat to its survival. Agent Choi's Dakebi house was starting to collapse. Agent Bronze quickly scanned the group. That's right. First, the agents, but Grapes was missing. He looked through the children, but the agent was truly gone. He heard the sound of someone running from the far end. From the opposite side of the escape pod, the corridor leading out, a Daydream Inc. employee was sprinting toward them. And slung on his back, covered in blood with his tail completely torn off, was Kim Soleum, limp and unconscious. Dripping blood, the employee shouted. Something glittering arsed through the air from the goat-masked employee's hand. Ryu Jaekwon turned his head. The glass bottle struck the tumor mass of the biological disaster. From the mouth of the bottle, a thick, purplish-pink liquid began pouring out.
Surprise syrup for kids.
It was the potion Kim Soleum had picked, based on the security chief's advice. If you converted it into Daydream Inc. terms, its effect would be...
Target temporarily loses reason, and, while incapacitated, reveals their most emotional and honest secrets.
The mermaid princess's figure, now doused in syrup, began to collapse. Twisting violently, it slumped to the floor. Dozens of tumor tendrils writhed inside the ulcers, calling to the children, but the connection was already severed. However, that potion had been made for humans.
That stuff doesn't last long.
Just a very short opening. The agents dashed for the escape pod, dragging the children with them.
Seriously, what a drag.
Amazingly, Daydream Inc.'s elite team member also sprang into action, quickly grabbing children and running straight into the escape pod. She even barked orders at her fellow employees.
If you send the escape pod out first, and I'm not back yet, know that you're dead.
At that shout from the elite team, the employees inside the escape pod clenched their jaws and helped get as many children on board as possible. For those bleeding badly, they applied the conches. The chaos was barely controlled, but time was running out.
There are still some outside.
Verification complete.
Having also consumed his Dokebi trick and returned to adult form, Agent Choi sprinted in last and slammed the escape pod door shut.
Beginning transport to destination.
With a hiss of steam from the machinery, the massive escape pod began to launch from the tunnel. Through the pod's window, they saw the giant mass moving to block the launch gate once again. Hundreds, no, thousands of ordinary infected creatures surged into the terminal. The escape pod slipped through just in time and shot out beyond the city, as people relaxed slightly and slumped in their seats. Far off in the open view of the city, the massive cluster that had once clung to the castle called Twinkle Twinkle Ocean Palace was lurching forward. The tremor reached the escape pod. The hive of the biological disaster was not limited to what they had seen. It had burrowed underground, had spread across the entire city. Endlessly crawling to the surface, it covered the city's center and spilled outward. The monstrous mass of flesh, now above ground, smashed the castle it had infested and hurled itself toward the escape pod in a final frenzy. It slapped its sticky mass down on the ground with heavy, thudding weight, twisting itself forward. The grotesque, horrifying, massive biological disaster reared up and revealed the mouth that had once been flush with the ground. A gaping hole lined with rows upon rows of massive, jagged teeth opened, roaring toward them, hurled flesh like missiles. The escape pod shook as it was struck by the ejected flesh. Agent Choi clamped a hand over an unknown staffer's mouth and looked back out the window.
It's not as close as it looks. Everyone calm down.
And then those who were finally able to gauge the biological disaster's scale realized something. It was so massive that it surpassed the range of human comprehension. The numbers were astronomical, so much so that it distorted all sense of distance. The enormous hive of the biological disaster couldn't leave the city's entrance and collapsed, leaving behind a strange vibration, like the sound of children laughing. The city's underground foundation began to cave in, pulling the disaster down with it. The escape pod quickly distanced itself from the scene, safely shooting up through the water. People exhaled hard, cold sweat on their faces, and then, not long after,
Please board your capsule.
the Daydream Inc. employees promptly began entering the capsule devices attached to the escape pod. Once inside, a person would be enveloped in a bubble-like sphere of strange air and launched toward the surface, losing consciousness in the process. When they woke again, they'd be back in reality. That was the escape method. The agents, having overheard this procedure while managing the company employees through both carrot and stick, followed suit, first boarding the children, then themselves. Naturally, the youngest agent went first. Because his contamination was so severe, they'd used a conch shell to prevent him from bleeding out. He'd avoided death and recovered somewhat, though he still looked exhausted. And since he still had the appearance of a child bearing remnants of an infected mare form, he looked all the more pitiful.
Did it all work out?
Agent Choi grabbed his hand tightly.
You did so well. Bet you were scared, huh? You can sleep now. We'll be heading back soon.
Kim Soleum, blinking slowly, climbed into a capsule. Soon after, he closed his eyes and took a deep, steady breath. As the capsule sealed shut, I barely suppressed a sigh of relief. I almost lost my mind. The after effects of reading the Necronomicon nearly shattered my sanity. If I hadn't used the conch, who knows what might have happened. But it was a gamble I had no choice but to take. What else could have cut all the kids' tails at once, incite the Daydream employees, and shake off the biological disaster? It had been sheer luck that I'd been connected to the children via infection-based telepathy. In a state where the hallucination of Twinkle Twinkle Ocean Palace had already weakened under madness and fear. And then, someone yelling, "Cut your tail!" inside your mind? Of course kids would follow for sure. I feel sorry for scaring them, but this was the only way to save everyone. I just hoped the shock wasn't too deep, and that with memory suppression and proper treatment afterward, they'd recover. I bit down on my lip. Still, I felt a bit more at ease. Because I'd brought every last child with me. And now that the entire city's been buried, it'll be a lot harder for anyone to start snatching kids again. Maybe this really was the end of the mermaid grave, of the Twinkle Twinkle Ocean Palace. And if Daydream Inc.'s research team threw a fit about it, honestly, not my problem. Those psychos can deal with their own fallout. I swallowed another sigh and let the growing haze of unconsciousness wash over me. A success was a success. Now, once I get back to reality... They did say we were going back to reality, but where exactly is that? Well, not really my concern. The veteran agents will handle it, right? I believe in you, Sunbaze. Even as I realized my right arm was still gone, I accepted the drowsiness with a strangely peaceful mind. All around me were unconscious adults and children who had yet to fully wake, and near me stood a single man completely awake. White lab coat, glasses. He stood in front of a now-awake Agent Bronze, grinning brightly, his eyes twinkling with fascination.
Ah, government agents, are you?
Research Team Section Chief of Daydream Inc. Goosebumps spread across my entire body. White-walled office, laboratories, a modern, pristine corporate interior I knew too well. Yes, it was familiar because this was my workplace until just a few months ago. We had escaped, right into the heart of Daydream Inc. For the escape destination to be set to Daydream Inc.'s headquarters, given that it was a darkness under their jurisdiction, sure, it's not all that strange, but still... If we all entered through different paths, shouldn't we have been sent back to where we each came from? Looking around, it seemed like everyone who'd been aboard the escape pod had, without exception, been dropped into the research team's office. Why the hell had every last one of us ended up stuck inside Daydream Inc.? Shouldn't an escape pod, at the very least, ask passengers where they want to go? Don't tell me. It was because the first person to board and calibrate the pod was someone from Daydream Inc.? Maybe that initial input had set the default destination for everyone. Problem was, thinking about that now didn't change anything. I wiped my cold sweat and shifted my eyes to glance at Agent Bronze, who was now facing off with Section Chief Kwak Jae-kong.
Ah, I see the uniform now. Disaster Management Bureau agents, right? Looks like a distress signal from our darkness reached your organization somehow. Haha!
Supernatural disasters are not private property. Please refrain from inappropriate terminology.
Well, you can put it that way, sure, but...
Kwak Jae-kong smiled behind his glasses.
Still, you did trespass into this here private company, right, sir? But hey, since we helped each other clear things up down there, yeah? If you'll just give us a quick interview, we won't even charge you for. Well, I mean, you did use one of our designated escape routes. Things like data usage fees, labor costs, expert consultation fees. You're a government agency, so surely you're not planning to dine and dash?
Honestly, I wouldn't have been surprised if Agent Bronze introduced his fist to Kwak Jae-kong's face right then and there. But shockingly, he didn't get angry. Instead, he stared with quiet contempt and replied,
We did not request any consultation, and the escape method we used was based on our own previously acquired intel.
Then I guess that makes it unauthorized trespassing, not collaboration.
Kwak Jae-kong continued smiling at him. Agent Bronze, silent, slipped a hand into the inside of his jacket. A strange tension crackled through the room. This place, we're standing in the heart of a psychotic pharmaceutical megacorp. And not just any office, but the research team. A simple press of a call button would make Daydream Inc.'s security team come running to subdue the intruders in no time. And since those security team members had long surpassed what could be called human, even these two veteran agents could end up horribly overpowered. In short, we were deep in enemy territory where no concept of societal common sense applied. A chill ran down my spine. This lunatic company wouldn't bat an eye at making a few civil servants disappear and turning them into test subjects. Just then, a groaning voice cut through the tension as someone stirred on the floor. With deliberate exaggeration, Agent Choi sat up, playing up the drama enough to cut through the tension.
Well, I couldn't stay lying down. I was too scared. What's this about trespassing? I mean, these days even crash landing out of a ghost story counts as unauthorized entry, huh? Goodness gracious. How's a guy supposed to work under such cruel rules?
Agent Choi stood up, locking eyes with Kwak Jae-kong and flashing a cheeky smile.
Over at the Disaster Management Bureau, we don't treat people who wander in during a safety inspection so coldly, you know?
Daydream Inc. hatred for the Disaster Management Bureau didn't stem from anything like wounded pride or jealousy. The reason was far more simple. The government simply did not recognize ownership over supernatural disasters. Officially, that is. So, when the Bureau identified a ghost story under Daydream Inc.'s jurisdiction and deemed it solvable, they'd storm in and put an end to it, all under the banner of a safety inspection. From Daydream Inc.'s point of view, the Bureau's more like a disaster that would ravage through and destroy raw material suppliers. Because of this, both sides had even established rules to limit how often their investigations clashed over ghost stories. Otherwise, the number of chaotic reports would have gotten out of hand.
I worry we might get a little too aggressive if this keeps happening, don't you think?
In other words, Agent Choi was now politely threatening to make their lives hell. And as the veteran members of both factions dueled with words and veiled menace, Agent Bronze, now out of the spotlight, casually turned his head in my direction while pretending to check on the children. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Zip it and don't stand out. If I got exposed here, the consequences would spiral out of control. Agent Bronze probably thought I'd faked my death and resigned from this company, which was why he was trying to protect my identity. But the truth was far more complicated. I'm not just missing. My identity was officially altered so that as far as the company's concerned, I'm dead because I'm working undercover as a corporate spy. If the research team found out who I really was and that information reached Director Ho, I couldn't even fathom what might happen. And if Director Chong, who thinks I hit her on the back of the head and ran, found out Kim Soleum was currently inside the company? No, worse than dead. This was a ghost story, after all. I absolutely cannot be exposed. So I naturally blended in among the children, doing everything I could to hide my presence. Meanwhile, Agent Choi's subtle threat, basically, keep this up and we'll keep crashing into your jurisdiction with inspections, was gradually leading the conversation toward a conclusion.
We'll just take the civilians and be on our way. No need for any formal thanks for rescuing your employees, of course. Ha-ha!
A clean diplomatic offer, but let's not forget, Kwok Jae-kang's a total nutjob.
Ah, yes, of course. Always so busy working for the good of the citizens. I understand completely.
He spread his arms wide, holding a file folder.
Then by all means, take only the civilians.
Kwok Jae-kang started walking toward us. I quickly lowered my posture and bowed my head, pretending I was still unconscious. Then, right above me...
But these contaminated ones here, no matter how you look at them, they don't seem like proper, functioning members of society. Why? Look right here. Gills instead of ears. That's not something a citizen should have. And this one has an extra arm. This one over here
is missing his right arm.
Goosebumps raced up my back.
Oh, of course, it could just be a poor civilian who lost it in an accident. But we won't know until we run some tests, right? Since they're all heavily contaminated, we'll go ahead and examine them, sort them, and make sure only true citizens are safely sent home.
And if they aren't citizens, the company would handle it themselves.